Hi there, everyone interested in the field of teaching ESL. Today I want to talk about a fairly common grammar problem that we find in ESL students writing. Also, I'll share you a technique that you can use to help your students discover and correct this kind of mistake in their writing. And I'll include 2 exercises that you can give your students to help them with this common problem. So first, here's an example of a sentence with the mistake. See if you can find it. My friends are going skiing, asked me to join them. You probably noticed that the word who is missing. The sentence should be, my friends who are going skiing asked me to join them. Here's another example. At the theater, we'll be watching a movie ends at 10:30. For this one, it's missing which or who. At the theater, we'll be watching a movie which ends at 10:30, or you could say at the theater, we'll be watching a movie that ends at 10:30. This kind of mistake is quite common with intermediate and advanced or higher level students because they're trying to write complex sentences, which is good. In the examples that I just showed you, they are writing independent and dependent clauses. So you can see the independent clause is my friends asked me to join them. And the dependent clause is who are going skiing. So we want students to learn how to edit their papers and be able to correct this kind of mistake with missing who, which, or that when they find them in their papers. So first, I'll tell you about a technique that you can use to lead your students to find this kind of mistake. So let's say a student wrote this sentence in an essay. Daniel often asks questions are hard to answer. And let's say you are having a conference with this student and you're sitting next to her. So your job as an ESL teacher is not to be your student's editor. In other words, you don't just go through and correct their mistakes. That wouldn't really help your students become better editors on their own work. So here's how you can lead her. Let's say her name is Anne. First, you say, Anne, in this sentence there is a mistake. Do you see it? And Anne looks at it and says, no, I don't see anything wrong. And you say, okay, there's a word missing. Do you know where? And again, Anne says, no, I don't see it. So next you say to Anne, write V above your verbs. So Anne writes this. So she writes V above asks, and she writes V above are, which is correct. You say good. Now write S above the subjects of those verbs. And Anne writes this. She puts S above Daniel. And you ask, what is the subject for are? You have the verb are. What's its subject? So most of the time, students at this level, the intermediate and more advanced levels, they'll realize that they need to add the subject who. But a few students, maybe like Anne, might say, questions is the subject for are. So you say, the word question is the object of ask, so that can't be the subject. But what can you do if Anne still can't find the mistake? Here's what you can do. Again, you don't want to just tell her, okay, change it to who. You want to, again, continue to try to give her some hints to lead her to discover this mistake. So you say to Anne, you are trying to combine 2 sentences here, which is good. And here are the 2 sentences you're trying to combine. Daniel often asks questions, and the questions are hard to answer. You say to Anne, now, we want to make one sentence. How can we do that? And so again, you write on the paper, Daniel often asks questions, blank, are hard to answer. And at this point, all students at this level know what to write here. They write who. So let's look at another example. There was an employer paid his workers well. This is very common type of mistake. When students start with the word there, very often they'll make this kind of mistake where they're missing the who or which or that. So let's say Edwin made this mistake on his paper. Just as I did in the example above with Anne, when talking individually with a student like Edwin about grammar mistakes that I found on their papers, I start by saying, "You have a grammar mistake in this sentence. Can you find it?" And often when they focus on the sentence, they're able to find it without any more hints. But if they can't, again, I try to give them some more hints like this. For example, with Edwin, I said, "You are missing a word." If he says he still can't find it, then I say, write V above the verbs. And again, here he puts V above was and V above paid. And I say, good. Now write S above your subjects. And this is a common mistake students make. They think there is the subject, the word there. And so he put there as the subject and employer as subject. Now I say, actually, there cannot be the subject of a sentence. And in a few minutes, I'll explain a little bit more to you why this is. But for Edwin, I just tell him that there cannot be the subject of the verb. Then I say, what is the subject of was? Who or what was? And he'll say, employer. An employer was. So there we have it then. So the employer is the verb, is the subject of was. All right, and I say that's right. Now, what is the subject of the verb paid? Clearly, the subject is missing. Again, I'd say 90% of the time, students at this level realize that they need to add who before paid. But let's say Edwin understands that he needs a subject for paid, but he doesn't know what to write. And again, I don't want to just tell him to put who there. I want to lead him to discover it. So I would write on his paper this. The employer, there was an employer, blank, paid his workers well. And for some reason, if he still doesn't get it, I give him another hint. And this time I put a W and 2 dashes afterward to represent a word with 3 letters. So there was an employer, blank, paid his workers well. At this point, every student is able to fill in the blanks. And best of all, they feel like they made the correction without the teacher directly telling them. To reinforce this need to add a who, which, or that, after talking to students like Anne and Edwin, I give them 2 short exercises which use an inductive approach. And I'll put a link below where you can download the exercise for free to use with your students. Often, I assign these exercises to a whole class if I think many of them would benefit from it, even though it'll probably be a review for a lot of them too. Before I forget, I mentioned that I'd explain a bit more about how we know there cannot be the subject of a sentence. So look at these 2 sentences. There was an employer who paid his workers well. There were some employers who paid their workers well. You can see that the verb was is singular in sentence 1 because employer is singular. And in sentence 2, the verb is were, which is plural, because employers is plural. Thus, because the word there doesn't affect the verb, we know it can't be the subject. Employer and employers has to be the subjects. In one of the links below, as I said, you can find 2 exercises that you can download and use with your students. And also, I'll include a link to to show how you can lead students to discover their mistakes on the assignments. So I hope this discussion was helpful and that you'll find the 2 links helpful too.